Hello everyone, my name is Ampem-Darko. I am a first-year resident in anesthesiology and critical care medicine in Baltimore, Maryland. And today I'd like to talk about what I wish I knew about studying in medical school to become a doctor. I think that it's very easy to get lost in getting all the metrics right, getting the straight A's, making sure that everything is perfect, moving on to the next level. So many things that can get so overwhelming. We get so focused on the outcome and we forget to actually think about these things. So this video today is going to be about focusing on the right principles before you get into the minutiae of studying, because there are certain things you need to know. And the fundamental thing is that if this is the path you're going to choose, be it law, medicine, architecture, whatever it is, you need to have a bit of an attitude of a lifelong learner. I have come to learn that these three things are the most important when it comes to having a right mindset about being a lifelong learner. And so for me, the very first thing is having a growth mindset. Secondly is having some self-discipline, and the last one is grit. And we're going to go through these very quickly with some research points and things I have learned about that I just want to share. So let's start with one, a growth mindset. What is a growth mindset? A growth mindset fundamentally believes that intelligence is not fixed, but rather can be developed. This is essentially the definition Dr. Dweck came up with. So Dr. Dweck published a research study in a very wide sample size of students in Chile and found out that a growth mindset was so important that even in children from low-income families who had a growth mindset were able to achieve just as much as children in higher income families with a fixed mindset. This shows you that once you have this perspective in life that you are capable of learning and developing the skills you need to constantly evolve and grow your intelligence, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, the findings of this study are astounding for multiple reasons, but for me, the biggest takeaway is that you cannot be afraid of failure and you cannot let a certain definition of success stop you from trying. And I believe that what they saw in people with a fixed mindset, unfortunately, is that any challenge they faced became a knock against whatever intrinsic ability they believed they had. However, people with a growth mindset fundamentally believe that effort is what matters the most, not any intrinsic ability. As such, you were free from any sort of identifying yourself as one thing or the other, because if I'm not a smart person, but if I'm a hardworking person, I believe that I'm able to accomplish this task that's in front of me without much of a challenge. The second thing I want to talk about is self-discipline. For me, this has been quite a struggle, which you don't expect to hear in someone who has graduated medical school, but it's important to keep in mind that we are all human, and it's easy to fall into patterns of behavior and thought patterns that are difficult to overcome. And I think fundamentally my issue with self-discipline was I'd have a really good streak of great behavior, and over time I'd get sick of it and relapse. I think that I didn't fully understand how to really crystallize these ideas until I read a book called Determined by Dr. James D. Turner out of Wake Forest. And so he fundamentally talks about how physicians should deal with burnout, but the number one thing that he harped on, and this is drawn from research from multiple sources as well, not just an original idea by him, but he states that it is incredibly crucial to let go of the outcome completely. The reason why is that people in medicine, or high-achieving individuals in general, tend to fall into this trap of having an arrival fallacy. So what is that? An arrival fallacy fundamentally means that you have this idea that I'm going to deprive myself of what I know I need to be happy now, hoping that when I get to the next milestone and arrive at my goal, I will be happy. In reality, though, if you think that way, almost every time you get to that goal, that happiness is transient at best. So how do you overcome that? How do you kind of become a self-disciplined individual if getting to the goal isn't going to give you happiness? So me, what I found most helpful is what Dr. Turner mentioned in his book, is that you just have to see the journey as the destination. Let's talk about an example like, say, going to the gym. It is easy to set a goal that this summer I'm going to be in the best shape of my life. I'm going to go to the gym 6 times a week. I'm going to make sure that I never miss. But what inevitably starts happening is that we have strong motivation for the first few weeks leading up to it, and then it all fizzles out. What Dr. Turner kind of proposes with his book is to stop thinking about why you're doing what you're doing and hoping you get to this goal, because if you, even if you are able to stick it out for months on end to get to this goal, research has shown, and it's all laid out in this book, that happiness does not last necessarily as long as you think it would. So what's the alternative? One thing I found helpful is that I need to change my reasons for wanting to go to the gym. I don't have a big goal of looking any way at any point in time. What I care about is that today I'm able to relieve some stress. I'm able to be present in a place that challenges me physically, and I'm able to just center myself and be a healthier version of myself with just this day alone. And I think that this is something that is super important when it comes to thinking about sticking with anything, really. If it's a study plan, if it's about communicating with friends, it's about anything that you really do care about as an individual. I believe that you need to fundamentally, as Dr. Turner says, let go of the outcome, because getting to that goal isn't necessarily what makes you happy. Embracing the journey is what really, in a way, can give you happiness. And finally, I want to talk about grit. One of the leading researchers in this field is Dr. Angela Duckworth, and she wrote the book Grit. She actually also published a study that showed that grit was an incredibly important ingredient to success. Specifically, she says, grit nonetheless demonstrated incremental predictability of success measures over and beyond IQ and conscientiousness. In this study, Dr. Duckworth looked at a group of 4,899 adults from Ivy League students, West Point graduates, and National Spelling Bee rank participants. What she really came to find is that in all these successful groups of people, the ones who achieve the most consistent success are those who just pushed through failure and adversity consistently. So what do you need to do that? Come to the definition of grit. She defines grit as perseverance and passion for long-term goals. It means going through challenges and growing and evolving and pushing yourself beyond just how you're feeling on a given day. Fundamentally, it just comes down to bouncing back after failures. You need to embrace that, because if you do not, and you get a question wrong or get something wrong, you will, going back to the first point, right, about having a growth mindset, you will simply hold on to that as a feeling, as a negative ding on who you are as a person, rather than learning from it. So for me, these three things have been incredibly helpful in overcoming challenges and growing as a person, and eventually as a doctor. The next gem I'd want to talk about is a book I'm sure a lot of people already heard about, is Make It Stick: The Science of Learning. I think that there are a lot of incredibly important points here, so I'm not going to belabor the point of going all over it, but I believe that if you have the time, I'd recommend you read it or get an audiobook version. I put a link to the Audible in my description below, and this is something for you to consider because it talks about the core tenets of learning, things that you need to know about studying effectively and becoming a good lifelong learner. So I'll go through the first 4 points they talk about in the book, and hopefully you'll make the time to go learn about more of it. These are things I apply to my study in a medical school, and I believe that they're invaluable to anyone that is hoping to become a lifelong learner, regardless of the field you're in. So the first one is you have to learn to retrieve things. You can't just hope to read a sentence and completely remember it after a day or two. So the point here is to make sure that whatever learning you're doing, making sure you're forcing yourself to recall some of the information. And this is why flashcards and having fill in the blanks in your studies are so integral, because you're not just passively reading through the information, you're forcing yourself to recall what you just read. I found it incredibly helpful to do this in trying to study huge amounts of information, and I believe that that's something that really anyone can benefit from. This book is entirely research-based, so it's not just my ideas I'm putting out there. This is evidence-based. The second point they also talk about is mixing up your practice. What does that mean? It means that people fall into the trap of learning, okay, today I'm only going to learn biology, and in this biology, I'm only going to learn about how leaves work, even though the final at the end of the semester involves everything. So once you've gotten through the basics of every topic you want to get through, it actually helps to not sequentially learn everything, but rather mix it up. Go from topic to topic, make sure that you cover everything, but it does not always have to be sequential because our brains are incredible. If you go through something the same way every time, what our brains actually tend to do is that it will start to take shortcuts and learn the sequence rather than the content. And this is, again, backed up by research. And so what you do by mixing up the order constantly is truly forcing legitimate recall. And this leads perfectly into the third point, which is avoid the illusion of knowing. It happened to me before where I read my notebook every day leading up to midterm and getting there and realized I don't know this as well as I thought I did. But why was that? It turns out our brains are very good at deceiving us and telling us we know things when we really do not. So I'll read over tons. I didn't really come up with the answer. After I covered it, I'll take a look at, oh yeah, I know that. But on the test, you don't get to take your hand off and look at what option is right. So I think that is actually a trap that a lot of learners fall into, and I know I have fallen into that trap as well. And so it's something to really be on the lookout for. It's something that researchers showed a lot of people do fall into, and I believe that it's important to kind of be aware of that once you start studying effectively. Next up is learning to embrace difficulties. See, you can't really learn if you're not pushing yourself constantly. It's easy to stay on a topic that you're familiar with, that you love. For me, it was, believe it or not, organic chemistry. And I like to stay there. But whenever I had to move to anything beyond that, specifically in the course called Brain and Behavior, I found so challenging. I had this inertia towards studying it, and I realized that I wasn't really helping myself. So this also goes back to my previous point of having some grit, embracing failures and overcoming them, and making sure that that's how you grow, because that is kind of the system we live in, right? If you're growing as a person, you have to constantly challenge yourself to grow. For me, these 4 salient points were the most helpful when it came to studying. Again, I cannot recommend highly enough that you check out this book, because it really will start to reframe the perspective and honestly the attitude each of us needs to be an effective lifelong learner. Finally, my last recommendation is this app called Anki. It is free to use, it has a lot of nuance to it, but for me, it is this program that encompasses everything in this book I just told you guys about. You as a learner using Anki, you get to make the cards yourself. There's a lot of fill in the blanks. There's a lot of ways that you can constantly test yourself. And every time you get a card right, it pushes it further and further back so that you are tested well on remembering. That's another key to really learning something effectively. It turns out research shows that to recall something effectively, you have to be forced to remember it at just the point you're about to forget it. And this is what the app does so well. I believe it was initially designed to learn Japanese kanji, but it has evolved beyond that so much. And so I'll put a link in the description for a YouTuber I love and follow who has everything you probably need to know about the app. His name's Anking. He also, I believe, is a doctor now, done with medical school. And I believe that regardless of where you're coming from as a professional, this is something that I believe you should look into. And finally, the book I legitimately found life-changing when it came to having the right attitude towards studying was Atomic Habits by James Clear. And this book is a very widely popular book. A lot of people read it. But for me, if there's one thing you could take out of it, is the simple idea of casting votes. Every decision we make, he says, is casting a vote for the kind of identity we hope to have. And I believe that this is something that I found helpful, because before, if I was doing something and on a good streak, for example, if I had a misstep of some sort, in my mind, it erased all the good I did. But think about it. It is just practically impossible. If I've been to the gym for a year of my life and on one day I don't go, it does not suddenly undo all the progress. And yet I found myself in this pattern of behavior that I needed to be perfect. In fact, you don't. He talks about it as casting a vote for the person you want to be. And in an election, the majority wins. All you have to do is do today right. Do it consistently and do it enough times for it to add a positive benefit to your life. Take the pressure of yourself, which is what I did. And all I had to do was be present and do this one thing in front of me right. I think that that is one thing. If you get nothing out of this video, that is one thing I would love for you to keep. So, as I said at the beginning of the video, these are things I wish I knew about studying to become a doctor. A lot of these things have come through a lot of trial and error, overcoming adversity, overcoming self-doubt and challenges. And so the point of putting this video out there is so you get all the shortcuts. You don't have to face the same challenges I faced. You will face a different set of challenges, but ultimately it will make you more efficient in becoming an effective learner over the course of your life. So you don't have to like or subscribe, but if you know at least one person this video can help, I'd encourage you to share it with them. And if one person has helped, then my work here is done. Thank you.